She insisted we split the bill in front of everyone, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. What she didn't know was that I'd been watching her game for months, and what happened next would expose everything she thought she'd hidden. The reservation was for 7 o'clock at Belmont's, the kind of upscale steakhouse where conversations happen in hushed tones, and the wine list costs more than most people's car payments. I arrived precisely on time, wearing the navy blazer Camila had given me for my 62nd birthday, back when she still pretended to care about family traditions. The hostess led me through the dimly lit dining room, past couples celebrating anniversaries and business deals being sealed over aged bourbon. My son Darius was already seated at the corner table, scrolling through his phone with the detached expression he'd perfected since marrying into what he thought was money. Camila sat beside him, her manicured fingers drumming against the white tablecloth, checking her reflection in the blade of her knife. "Dad." Darius stood briefly, the obligatory embrace lasting exactly 2 seconds. "Thanks for coming." Camila offered her cheek for an air kiss that never quite connected. "Theodore," she said, my name sharp on her tongue like she was tasting something bitter. "So glad you could make it to our little celebration." Their little celebration. 6 months of marriage, and she'd already turned every family gathering into a performance where I played the supporting role of the tolerated father-in-law. I took my seat, noting how they'd chosen the table, strategically positioned so anyone walking by could see us, could witness whatever show Camila had planned. The waiter approached, a young man with earnest eyes and practiced charm. "Good evening, folks. Can I start you off with something to drink?" "We'll have the 2018 Bordeaux," Camila announced without consulting anyone. "The Chateau Margaux." I glanced at the wine menu. $340 a bottle. For a Tuesday night dinner that I'd been told was just a casual catch-up. Darius shifted uncomfortably. "Honey, maybe we should—" "It's fine," she cut him off, her smile razor thin. "Theodore can afford it. Can't you, Theodore? After all those years of telling us about financial responsibility and living within our means." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. This wasn't about wine. This was about something deeper. Something she'd been building toward since the day she walked into our family, and decided I was an obstacle to whatever vision she had for her future. I nodded to the waiter. "The Bordeaux sounds perfect." But as I watched Camilla's satisfied smirk spread across her face, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something I didn't yet understand. Something that would change everything about what I thought I knew about my son's wife, and about the game she'd been playing all along. The wine arrived. The performance was just beginning. Dinner arrived with the kind of theatrical presentation that justified the astronomical prices. Wagyu beef for Camila, lobster for Darius, and a simple salmon for me, the cheapest item on the menu, though I hadn't chosen it for the price. I'd chosen it because I'd lost my appetite the moment I realized what this dinner was really about. Camila dominated the conversation, regaling us with stories about her new interior design clients, dropping names like breadcrumbs for pigeons, the Hendersons with their waterfront estate, the Blackwells and their vineyard renovation, each name delivered with the precision of someone building a case. "And then there's the Morrison project," she continued, cutting her steak with surgical precision. "They want to completely renovate their penthouse. Spare no expense, they said. Some people just understand quality." The barb was subtle but intentional. I'd heard variations of this speech before, always the same subtext. Some people have money. Some people appreciate the finer things. Some people aren't retired mechanics living on fixed incomes. Darius tried to steer the conversation toward safer waters. "Dad, how's the volunteer work at the community center going?" "It's rewarding," I said simply. "We're helping families get back on their feet, teaching job skills, financial literacy." Camila's laugh was like crystal breaking. "How noble. teaching people to count pennies while others are actually building wealth. The words hit their target. Around us, conversations continued in their polite murmurs, but I felt the weight of nearby tables starting to pay attention. Camila had calculated this moment perfectly, public enough to sting, subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. When the waiter returned to clear our plates, Camila struck. "We'll need separate checks," she announced, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the neighboring tables. "3 ways. My father-in-law prefers to handle his own expenses." The waiter blinked, clearly caught off guard. Of course, ma'am. Let me just... Actually," Camilla continued, her smile growing sharper, "make sure his includes his portion of the wine. Wouldn't want anyone to think we're subsidizing his evening out." The silence that followed was deafening. Darius stared at his empty plate like it held the answers to questions he was too afraid to ask. The waiter stood frozen, caught between professionalism and obvious discomfort. But it was the couple at the table beside us who broke first. The woman, elegant, silver-haired, with the kind of posture that spoke of old money, turned in her chair. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Did you just ask to split the bill 3 ways?" Camilla's confidence faltered for just a moment. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" The woman's husband, distinguished in his navy blazer and gold watch, leaned forward. "We know enough." And in that moment, I realized this dinner was about to become something none of us had expected. The silver-haired woman rose from her table with the kind of grace that money can't buy, but breeding can instill. Her husband followed, and I noticed how conversations around us began to quiet, the way a theater hushes before the curtain rises. "Forgive the interruption," the woman said, her voice carrying a warmth that somehow made her words feel more dangerous than Camilla's calculated cruelty. "But I couldn't help overhearing. You're asking this gentleman to pay for his portion of a $300 bottle of wine that you ordered without consulting him." Camilla's face flushed, but her chin lifted defiantly. "Our family finances are really none of your concern." "You're absolutely right," the woman agreed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But hospitality is my concern, especially when it's being so poorly demonstrated in my establishment." The word hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. My establishment. Darius looked up sharply. "Your establishment?" The woman extended her hand toward me, ignoring Camilla entirely. "Victoria Belmont. My husband Charles and I own Belmont's. We've owned it for 37 years." I shook her hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of someone who'd worked for everything she had, despite the elegant exterior. "Theodore Castellanos." "Mr. Castellanos," she continued, her attention still focused solely on me. "I understand you do volunteer work at the community center." "Yes, ma'am. Financial literacy programs mostly, helping people get back on their feet." Victoria nodded approvingly. "The Morrison Center on 5th Street?" I blinked in surprise. "Yes? How did you—" "My daughter Rachel runs the after-school program there. She's mentioned your work. Says you've helped dozens of families avoid foreclosure, taught them to budget, to save." Victoria's voice grew warmer. "She says the kids call you Mr. Ted, and that you slip 20s into their backpacks when you think no one's looking." The blood drained from Camilla's face. Around us, I could feel the shift in attention, the way the other diners were now looking at our table with interest rather than second-hand embarrassment. Charles Belmont spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of old authority. "Young lady," he addressed Camilla directly, "in 37 years of running this restaurant, I've learned to recognize class. It has nothing to do with the wine you order or the names you drop. It's about how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching." Camila's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. We were just, it's a family matter. No, Victoria said firmly. It's a character matter, and yours is showing. She turned back to me with genuine warmth. Mr. Castellanos, your dinner tonight is on the house, and I do mean your dinner, not theirs. The waiter appeared as if summoned, his earlier discomfort replaced by professional efficiency. Yes, Mrs. Belmont? Please prepare Mr. Castellanos' check, the entire evening, wine included. She glanced at Camila with cool dismissal. The other two can settle their portions separately. As Victoria and Charles returned to their table, the restaurant seemed to exhale collectively. But I could see in Camila's eyes that this wasn't over. This was just the beginning of something much larger than a dinner check. The ride home was suffocating. Darius drove in silence while Camila stared out the passenger window, her reflection in the glass showing a face I'd never seen before, calculating, cold, and utterly furious. I sat in the back seat, watching the city lights blur past, trying to process what had just happened. We pulled into my driveway, and I expected the usual perfunctory goodbye. Instead, Camila turned around, her eyes bright with a rage she could no longer contain. That was humiliating, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? What I've done? I kept my voice level. I had dinner with my son and his wife. You made us look like fools. Those people, they'll tell everyone. Our reputation. Your reputation? The words came out sharper than I intended. Camila, you tried to embarrass me in front of a room full of strangers. You ordered expensive wine without asking, and then tried to stick me with the bill as some kind of lesson. Darius finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Dad, maybe we should all just... No, Camila cut him off. Your father needs to understand his place in this family. We're building something here, Darius and I. We have plans, connections, a future, and we can't afford to be dragged down by... She gestured at me dismissively. By what? By a retired mechanic who volunteers at a community center? By someone who doesn't understand how the world really works? Her mask was completely off now. Do you think those people at the restaurant care about your little charity work? Do you think the Morrisons or the Hendersons want to associate with someone who fixes cars for a living? The silence that followed was devastating. Darius stared at the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the leather. This wasn't just about money or class. This was about erasure. Camila wanted to rewrite our family history, starting with writing me out of it. I opened the car door. Thank you for dinner, both of you. As they drove away, I stood in my driveway under the streetlight, watching their taillights disappear around the corner. Inside my house, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop, staring at the screen without really seeing it. Something had shifted tonight. Victoria Belmont's unexpected intervention had revealed more than just Camila's cruelty. It had shown me that there were people watching, people who saw value in things that couldn't be measured by wine lists or designer labels. But it had also shown me something else. Camila's reaction had been too immediate, too practiced. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to humiliate someone into submission, which meant there were others. Other people she'd targeted, other bridges she'd burned. I opened a browser window and typed in Camila Richardson Interior Design. It was time to understand exactly who my son had married. And more importantly, it was time to understand what she was really after. Because something told me this dinner was just the opening move in a much larger game. 3 days of digging revealed more than I'd bargained for. Camila Richardson, now Camila Castellanos, had left quite a digital footprint, and not all of it painted the picture of success she'd been selling. Her interior design business existed mostly on social media. Beautiful photos of luxury homes, testimonials from clients with names I recognized from society pages. But when I cross-referenced the addresses, most of the houses belonged to real estate staging companies. The testimonials came from accounts created within months of each other, all following the same pattern of glowing reviews. I found something else too. Court records. 3 civil suits in the past 2 years, all settled out of court. 2 breach of contract cases from clients claiming shoddy work. 1 from a former business partner claiming Camila had stolen client lists and proprietary designs. But the most interesting discovery came from an unexpected source. My neighbor, Ellen Briggs, who worked in the county assessor's office. "Theodore," she said, leaning over our shared fence as I watered my tomatoes. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but I saw that article about you in the community newsletter. The one about your volunteer work. Just trying to help where I can." Ellen nodded approvingly. "My sister works at the title company downtown. She mentioned something odd the other day. Said a woman came in asking about property records, specifically about your house." I set down the watering can. "My house?" Wanted to know about the deed, any liens, the assessed value. Said she was family, doing research for insurance purposes. Ellen's expression grew concerned. "Thing is, my sister remembered her because she was so insistent, and because she offered to pay cash for information that should be public record anyway." My blood ran cold. What did this woman look like? Young, blonde, expensive clothes, driving a white BMW. Camila. That evening, I called my lawyer, Antonio Reeves, a man I'd known since our kids played Little League together. We met at his office the next morning, and I laid out everything I'd discovered. Antonio listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on his legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Theodore, this is concerning. Property research isn't inherently illegal, but the pattern you're describing suggests someone building a financial profile." He tapped his pen against the desk. "Have you noticed any changes in Darius lately? Financial stress? Unusual expenses?" I thought about my son's new watch, the expensive dinners, the way he'd been avoiding our usual weekend coffee meetings. Now that you mention it, yes. I'm going to make some calls. In the meantime, I want you to pull your credit reports, check all your bank statements, make sure your will and estate documents are secure. Antonio's expression was grave. If someone is planning financial manipulation, they usually start with information gathering. Leaving his office, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Camilla's behavior at the restaurant hadn't been about embarrassing me. It had been about establishing a narrative. The financially irresponsible father-in-law. The burden on the young couple's bright future. I thought about Darius, about the boy who used to help me in the garage, who'd learned to change oil and brake pads before he learned to drive. When had he stopped looking me in the eye? When had he started seeing me through Camilla's lens? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Can you meet me at the coffee shop on Maple Street tomorrow at 10 a.m.? This is Rachel Belmont." Victoria Belmont's daughter, the one who ran the after-school program at the community center. I stared at the message, wondering what she could possibly want to discuss. But something told me it wasn't about volunteer schedules or funding applications. It was about Camila. The coffee shop on Maple Street was one of those carefully curated places where everything looked accidentally vintage, and the baristas wore flannel-like uniforms. Rachel Belmont sat in the corner booth, nursing a latte and checking her phone with the restless energy of someone who dealt with children all day. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with her mother's intelligent eyes and her father's no-nonsense posture. When she saw me, she stood and extended her hand. "Mr. Castellanos, thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd want to meet with a stranger. Your parents went out of their way to defend me the other night. I figure that earns you the benefit of the doubt." We sat across from each other, and Rachel got straight to the point. I heard about what happened at the restaurant. My mother was furious, not just about the bill situation, but about how that woman treated you. She paused, stirring her latte absently. The thing is, it wasn't the first time I'd heard her name. Camila. Camila Richardson, before she married your son. Rachel pulled out her phone and scrolled through her photos. This was taken at our annual fundraising gala 3 months ago. The photo showed Camila in an elegant black dress, smiling beside a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. They were holding champagne glasses and standing in front of a banner that read, Children's Education Foundation. She came as someone's guest, introduced herself as an interior designer, said she was interested in donating services for our new facility. Rachel swiped to the next photo. She was very charming, very interested in our donor list, our funding sources. In the second photo, Camila was deep in conversation with an elderly woman wearing enough jewelry to fund a small nonprofit. That's Mrs. Whitfield. She's one of our major benefactors, recently widowed, worth about $12 million. Rachel's voice grew tighter. 2 weeks after the gala, Mrs. Whitfield called to say she was reconsidering her annual donation. Said she'd found a more personal way to help disadvantaged children. I felt a familiar chill. Through Camila? Through a private foundation that Camila had recommended. One that promised more direct impact, less administrative overhead. Rachel pulled up another screen on her phone. I did some research. The foundation exists, but it's brand new. Incorporated 6 weeks after our gala. She showed me the incorporation documents. The foundation's board of directors included names I didn't recognize, but the registered address was familiar. The same building where Camila claimed to have her design office. Mrs. Whitfield isn't the only one. I've heard from 3 other organizations in town. Same pattern. Camila shows up, gets friendly with donors, suggests alternative giving strategies. Rachel leaned forward. Mr. Castellanos, I think your daughter-in-law is running some kind of systematic donation diversion scheme. The pieces were starting to fit together. The fake client testimonials, the property research, the public humiliation designed to make me look unreliable. Camila wasn't just trying to erase me from her social circle. She was building a case for erasing me from my son's life entirely. There's something else, Rachel continued. I called a friend who works at the Better Business Bureau. Camila Richardson Interior Design has 17 complaints filed against it in the past 18 months. But here's the weird part. None of them ever got resolved because the complainants all withdrew their claims. Withdrew them? My friend thinks they were paid off. Small settlements, enough to make the problems go away without admitting guilt. Rachel closed her phone. Mr. Castellanos, I think your daughter-in-law is very good at making problems disappear, which makes me wonder what she considers you to be. As I walked back to my car, Rachel's words echoed in my mind. Camila wasn't just ambitious or social climbing, she was systematic. She identified targets, gathered intelligence, and then eliminated obstacles. The question was, what was her ultimate goal? And how far was she willing to go to achieve it? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Ellen Briggs called at 7 a.m, her voice tight with urgency. Theodore, you need to get down to the courthouse today. My sister at the title company just called me. Someone filed a petition yesterday afternoon. What kind of petition? A guardianship petition. For you. The words hit like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter. What does that mean? It means someone is claiming you're mentally incapacitated and need a legal guardian to manage your affairs. Ellen's voice was shaking. Theodore, if this goes through, you could lose control of everything. Your house, your bank accounts, your medical decisions. I was dressed and driving within 10 minutes. At the courthouse, I found Antonio Reeves already waiting, his usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled fury. "This is unprecedented," he said, scanning the legal documents. "The petition claims you've been showing signs of cognitive decline, making poor financial decisions, exhibiting erratic behavior." "Based on what evidence?" "Witness statements. 3 of them." He flipped to the next page. "Darius Castellanos, Camila Castellanos, and someone named Dr. Marcus Webb." My heart sank at seeing my son's name on the list. "Who's Dr. Webb?" "According to this, a psychologist who observed you during a consultation 3 weeks ago." Antonio looked up. "Theodore, did you see a psychologist recently?" "Number I've never heard of Marcus Webb." Antonio pulled out his laptop and started typing. "Webb has a practice on the North Side. Specializes in geriatric psychology and capacity evaluations." He paused, frowning at the screen. "That's interesting. His practice was incorporated 4 months ago, right around the time Camila married your son." The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. She set this up. All of it. "The petition requests emergency temporary guardianship pending a full hearing." Antonio's voice was grim. "It's scheduled for tomorrow morning. Camila is requesting to be named as your guardian." "Can she do that?" "If the court believes you're incapacitated and she's the closest responsible family member, yes." He closed the laptop. "Theodore, we need to move fast. I'm going to file a motion to dismiss and request an independent psychological evaluation. But first, I need you to tell me everything about your interactions with Camila over the past 6 months." I spent the next 2 hours detailing every conversation, every dinner, every seemingly innocent question about my finances or my health. Antonio took notes, occasionally asking for clarification or specific dates. "She's been building a case," he concluded. "The expensive dinner, the public embarrassment, getting you to appear financially irresponsible or socially inappropriate. She's probably been documenting everything." "But Darius signed this petition. My own son thinks I'm incompetent." Antonio's expression softened slightly. "Or someone convinced him you were becoming incompetent. Manipulation works both ways, Theodore. She might have been working on him longer than she's been working on you." That afternoon, I drove to Darius's office, a small architectural firm where he'd been building his career before Camila came along. His secretary said he was in a meeting, but I told her I'd wait. I sat in the lobby for 2 hours, watching my son through the glass walls of his office as he worked at his computer, looking older and more tired than I remembered. When he finally emerged, his face went pale at seeing me. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk, son, about the guardianship petition." His shoulders sagged, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read him bedtime stories. "Can we go somewhere private?" he asked quietly. We ended up at the park where I'd taught him to ride a bike, sitting on the same bench where we'd had countless father-son conversations over the years. "Camila says you're not taking care of yourself," he began, not meeting my eyes. "She says you're making bad decisions, that you seem confused sometimes." "When have I seemed confused to you, Darius?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, Dad. Maybe I just haven't been paying attention. Or maybe someone has been telling you what to see instead of letting you see for yourself." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of trust that was suddenly, heartbreakingly fragile. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse armed with more than just Antonio's legal expertise. Rachel Belmont had spent the night making phone calls, and the results were devastating to Camila's carefully constructed narrative. Dr. Marcus Webb's psychology practice didn't just materialize 4 months ago. It was funded by a business loan co-signed by Camila Richardson. The office space was leased through the same property management company that handled Camila's fake design studio. And most damning of all, Webb's only other client was Mrs. Whitfield, the elderly donor who'd been convinced to redirect her charitable giving. Antonio had also tracked down the three families who'd withdrawn their Better Business Bureau complaints against Camila. With promises of confidentiality and potential immunity, two of them agreed to speak about what had really happened. The Hendersons' waterfront estate that Camila had boasted about? She'd been hired to redesign their master bedroom and had instead convinced them to invest in a renovation loan that somehow ended up in her personal accounts. When they complained, she'd threatened to sue them for defamation and provided evidence that their payment had been processed correctly, evidence that her forged bank records supported. The Blackwell's vineyard renovation had followed a similar pattern. Camila had gained their trust, convinced them to make increasingly large, material deposits, and then disappeared when they began asking for receipts. The settlement had included a non-disclosure agreement that prevented them from warning others. But the most damaging testimony came from someone unexpected. Dr. Webb himself. Faced with potential fraud charges and the loss of his license, Webb had decided to cooperate. In a sworn affidavit, he admitted that Camila had coached him on what to observe during our supposed consultation, which had never actually taken place. She'd provided him with a script of behaviors to document, along with payment for his services. Your Honor, Antonio addressed the judge, this isn't a legitimate concern about my client's mental capacity. This is an elaborate fraud designed to steal his assets and isolate him from his family. The judge, a stern woman in her 50s, had been growing visibly angry as each piece of evidence was presented. Ms. Castellanos, she addressed Camila directly, do you have anything to say about these allegations? Camila sat beside her lawyer, her face a mask of wounded innocence. Your Honor, I love my father-in-law. Everything I've done has been out of concern for his well-being. If there have been misunderstandings... Misunderstandings? The judge's voice rose slightly. You fabricated a psychological evaluation, manipulated witness testimony, and filed fraudulent documents with this court. These aren't misunderstandings, Ms. Castellanos. They're felonies. I watched my son sitting 3 rows back, his face pale as paper. This was the woman he'd married, the woman he'd trusted enough to sign a petition declaring his own father incompetent. The judge continued. The guardianship petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation. She fixed Camila with a stare that could have melted steel. Ms. Castellanos, you're hereby ordered to have no contact with Mr. Theodore Castellanos outside of court-supervised circumstances. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. As the courtroom cleared, Darius approached me hesitantly. His eyes were red-rimmed, his usually perfect appearance disheveled. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I looked at my son, seeing both the man he'd become and the boy he'd once been. What are you going to do now? He glanced back toward where Camila was speaking urgently with her lawyer. I don't know. I honestly don't know anything anymore. Well, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder, that's a start. The story broke on a Wednesday morning, and by noon, it was the lead item on every local news outlet. Local interior designer accused of elaborate elder fraud scheme ran across the bottom of television screens throughout the city. Rachel Belmont had been busy. Her connections in the nonprofit world had helped her compile a comprehensive list of Camila's victims, and when the story went public, more people began coming forward. The charity donation diversions weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic operation that had been running for over 2 years. The Better Business Bureau released a statement advising consumers to be wary of contractors who demanded large upfront payments or pressured clients into financial decisions beyond the scope of their original agreements. Mrs. Whitfield's financial advisor went public with details about how Camila had convinced his client to redirect her charitable giving, resulting in the loss of nearly $200,000. But it was Victoria Belmont's interview with Channel 7 News that really captured public attention. This young woman came into our restaurant and attempted to humiliate an elderly man who spends his free time helping families in need, Victoria said, her composure as elegant as ever, but her eyes flashing with controlled anger. She ordered expensive wine without consultation and then tried to embarrass him into paying for her extravagance. What we witnessed wasn't just bad manners, it was predatory behavior. The reporter pressed for details about the community center work I'd been doing. Victoria smiled, the first genuine warmth she'd shown during the interview. Mr. Castellanos has helped over 40 families avoid foreclosure in the past 2 years. He teaches financial literacy classes every Tuesday evening, completely volunteer. He's the kind of man who notices when a child's shoes are worn out and quietly replaces them without fanfare. Her expression hardened again. And his daughter-in-law tried to convince a court that he was mentally incompetent. The interview went viral. By Thursday morning, I was getting calls from reporters, producers, and people I hadn't heard from in years. The community center had received enough donations to fund their programs for the next 18 months. 3 local businesses offered to sponsor the financial literacy classes I taught. But the call that mattered most came Friday afternoon. "Dad?" Darius's voice was quiet, uncertain. "Can we talk?" We met at the same park bench where we'd had our last conversation, but this time, my son looked me directly in the eye. "I filed for divorce yesterday," he said without preamble. "I should have done it months ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of admitting I'd made such a terrible mistake." "Darius." "Let me finish, please." He took a shaky breath. "I knew something was wrong. All those questions about your finances, your health, your living situation. The way she talked about you when you weren't around. I told myself she was just ambitious, just trying to fit into a family that was different from what she was used to." He stared at his hands. But deep down, I knew. And I let it happen anyway, because it was easier than confronting the truth. "Son, we all make mistakes. The question is what we do about them." "I'm going to testify," he said firmly. "When her case goes to trial, I'm going to tell them everything. Every conversation, every manipulation, every time she tried to turn me against you." He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I almost lost the best man I know because I was too weak to stand up to her." I reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "You're standing up now. That's what matters." As we sat there in the fading afternoon light, I realized that Camilla's plan had backfired in the most fundamental way possible. She'd tried to isolate me from my family and my community, but instead, she'd brought us all closer together. The trial lasted 3 weeks and became the kind of local spectacle that filled the courthouse gallery every day. Camila had hired an expensive defense team from the state capitol, lawyers who specialized in white-collar crime, and had a reputation for getting wealthy clients reduced sentences. But all the legal expertise in the world couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence Antonio and the prosecution had assembled. Bank records, forged documents, testimony from victims, and the damning confession from Dr. Webb painted a picture of someone who had turned manipulation into an art form. The most powerful testimony came from Mrs. Whitfield herself. At 82, she walked to the witness stand with a cane, but spoke with the clarity of someone who had built a business empire and recognized predatory behavior when she saw it. "She was charming," Mrs. Whitfield testified, her voice steady despite her age. "She understood exactly how to make me feel important, special, like I was making a real difference. She had photos of children who would benefit from my donations, stories about families she'd personally helped." The prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Lisa Chen, asked, "What convinced you to redirect your charitable giving?" She said the traditional organizations were bureaucratic, that too much money went to administrative costs. She promised that my donations would go directly to families in need, with regular updates on how the money was being used. Mrs. Whitfield's voice grew harder. Those updates never came. When I asked for them, she said the families preferred to remain anonymous for privacy reasons. "How much money did you donate to Ms. Castellanos' foundation?" $237,000 over 6 months. A murmur went through the courtroom. Camila sat at the defense table, her expression carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Dr. Webb's testimony was even more damaging. Under oath, he admitted to falsifying psychological evaluations for 3 different clients, all elderly, all with substantial assets that Camila had been targeting. She provided me with detailed instructions about what behaviors to document, he testified, his voice barely above a whisper. She said it was standard practice for preventive care, identifying cognitive decline before it became dangerous. When it was Darius's turn to testify, the courtroom was completely silent. My son spoke quietly, but clearly about the months of manipulation, the gradual isolation techniques Camila had used, the way she'd convinced him that my volunteer work was a sign of instability rather than service. "She made me doubt my own father," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "She convinced me that helping people was actually a sign that he was losing his judgment, that he was being taken advantage of by people who didn't really care about him." The defense tried to paint Camila as a victim of circumstance, someone who had gotten in over her head with business debts and made poor decisions under pressure. But their argument fell apart when the prosecution presented evidence of the systematic nature of her crimes. The fake business credentials, the elaborate schemes to gain victims' trust, the sophisticated financial instruments she'd used to hide stolen money. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman announced. "Wire fraud, elder abuse, falsification of legal documents, conspiracy to commit fraud." The judge sentenced Camila to 8 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to her victims. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked back at Darius one last time, but my son kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us, but I only answered one question. "Mr. Castellanos, what do you want people to learn from this experience?" I thought about all the families I'd worked with at the community center, all the people who'd been taken advantage of by smooth-talking predators who knew exactly how to exploit trust and vulnerability. "Pay attention to the people in your life," I said. "Real character shows up in small moments, in how someone treats a waiter or talks about their neighbors. And if someone tries to isolate you from people who care about you, ask yourself why." 6 months after the trial, I found myself back at Belmont's restaurant, but this time as an honored guest rather than a target for humiliation. Victoria and Charles Belmont had insisted on hosting a celebration dinner for the community center's most successful year in its history. The donations that had poured in after the news coverage had allowed them to expand their programs, hire additional staff, and provide services to twice as many families. Rachel had been promoted to executive director, and she'd asked me to serve on their board of advisors. "To second chances," Victoria said, raising her glass of wine, a modest California vintage that no one had ordered to prove a point. Around the table sat an unlikely group. Rachel and her husband, Antonio and his wife, Ellen Briggs, and her sister from the title company, Mrs. Whitfield, and 3 families I'd helped through the financial literacy program. At the head of the table sat Darius, looking healthier and more confident than I'd seen him in years. The divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier, and my son had thrown himself into rebuilding both his career and his relationships. He'd started volunteering at the community center, teaching basic architectural skills to young people interested in the construction trades. "Dad," he said during a quiet moment when the others were engaged in their own conversations, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The house. Your house, I mean. I know Camila had been researching the property records, and I think I know why." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She thought you'd eventually need assisted living, and she was positioning herself to be the one who made decisions about your assets." I nodded. It made sense, given everything else we'd learned about her long-term planning. "The thing is," Darius continued, "maybe she wasn't entirely wrong about one thing. Not about you needing assistance, you're sharper than people half your age, but about the house being too big for one person." I waited, sensing there was more. "I was wondering if you'd consider having a roommate, someone who could help with maintenance, share expenses, maybe learn a thing or two about fixing cars and helping people." He smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him since before his wedding. "I know it's presumptuous, but I'd like to move back home, Dad. Not as the kid who needs taking care of, but as the adult who wants to be part of the family again." The offer caught me off guard, but it felt right in a way that surprised me. "What about your apartment?" "Lease is up next month, and honestly, I've missed our Sunday morning coffee and newspaper routine." Later that evening, as we walked to our cars, Mrs. Whitfield approached me with her characteristic directness. "Mr. Castellanos, I have a proposition for you." "I'm listening." "I'm establishing a new foundation, a real one this time, with proper oversight and transparent operations. I want to focus on preventing elder fraud, educating people about the warning signs, providing legal assistance to victims." She handed me a business card. "I'd like you to consider serving as the community outreach coordinator." The card was simple, elegant. The Whitfield Foundation for Elder Protection. Below that, in smaller print, dignity, security, justice. "It would be a paid position," she continued. "Not a fortune, but enough to let you expand your volunteer work without worrying about your own financial security." I looked around at the group gathered on the sidewalk, people who had started as strangers and become something like family through shared adversity and common purpose. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'd be honored." 6 weeks later, I sat in my new office, a modest space in the same building as the community center, reviewing case files of potential fraud victims. The work was challenging but rewarding, combining my experience helping families with a broader mission of protecting vulnerable people from predators like Camila. Darius had moved back home, and our evening conversations over dinner had become the highlight of my day. He was dating someone new, a teacher he'd met through the volunteer program, and I could see that he was taking his time, learning to trust his own judgment again. The Whitfield Foundation had already helped a dozen families recover stolen assets and prevented several more scams from succeeding. We'd partnered with local law enforcement to provide training for officers who worked with elderly victims, and we were developing educational materials for distribution at senior centers and community groups. But perhaps the most satisfying part of the whole experience was the follow-up dinner we had at Belmont's every month. It had become a tradition, a way of staying connected with the people who had stood up when it mattered most. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Riverside Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 500 people gathered for the first annual Elder Protection Summit. Representatives from law enforcement, social services, healthcare, and nonprofit organizations had come together to share resources and strategies for combating elder fraud. The keynote speaker was supposed to be a federal prosecutor from Washington, but she'd been delayed by weather. Victoria Belmont, who was serving as the summit coordinator, had asked if I'd be willing to fill in. "I'm not an expert on criminal justice," I'd told her. "I'm just someone who learned to pay attention." "That's exactly why you should speak," she'd replied. So there I was, facing a room full of professionals who dealt with elder abuse cases every day, trying to find the words to explain what I'd learned from my experience with Camila. A year ago, I began, I thought I was just having dinner with my son and his new wife. I had no idea I was walking into an elaborate fraud scheme that had been months in the making. I had no idea that the woman I was trying to accept as part of my family had been systematically gathering information about my assets, my relationships, and my vulnerabilities. I paused, looking for familiar faces in the audience. Rachel Belmont sat in the third row taking notes. Mrs. Whitfield was near the back, flanked by two staff members from her foundation. Antonio was at a table with other lawyers who specialized in elder law. The thing about predators, I continued, is that they're often incredibly charming. They don't look like criminals. They look like successful business people, caring family members, helpful friends. They gain your trust by paying attention to what you value and then reflecting it back to you. I told them about Camila's systematic approach, how she'd identified my volunteer work as something I was proud of, and then used it against me, making it seem like evidence of poor judgment rather than community service. How she'd isolated me from my son by gradually convincing him that my behavior was concerning. How she'd researched my assets and legal vulnerabilities before filing fraudulent guardianship papers. But here's what she didn't count on, I said, finding my rhythm. She didn't count on people like the Belmonts, who recognized cruelty disguised as sophistication. She didn't count on community members who were willing to dig deeper when something didn't feel right. She didn't count on the power of truth when it's backed up by evidence and courage. I spoke about the importance of documentation, of maintaining connections with trusted friends and advisors, of being wary of anyone who tried to rush important decisions or discourage you from seeking second opinions. Most importantly, I concluded, don't let anyone convince you that asking for help is a sign of weakness. The strongest thing any of us can do is stay connected to our communities, to the people who know us well enough to recognize when something isn't right. The applause was warm and sustained, but what meant more to me were the people who approached afterward with their own stories. Some of narrow escapes from fraud schemes, others of family members they were worried about, all of them grateful for practical advice from someone who had been through it. Later that evening, Darius and I sat on the porch of our house, sharing a beer and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was the kind of peaceful moment that might have been destroyed if Camila's plan had succeeded. You know what's funny? Darius said. She kept talking about people who understood quality, people who appreciated the finer things, but she never understood the most valuable thing of all. What's that? Family, real family, the kind that stands by you when things get difficult, not the kind that tries to profit from your vulnerabilities. I nodded, thinking about all the people who had become like family over the past year. Victoria and Charles Belmont, Rachel, Mrs. Whitfield, the families at the community center who had shared their stories and their strength. She thought she was so clever, I said, planning everything out, manipulating everyone around her. But she made one crucial mistake. What was that? I smiled, taking another sip of beer. She underestimated the power of good people doing the right thing, and once that starts, it's very hard to stop. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I reflected on how a single dinner at an upscale restaurant had changed everything. Camila had intended to humiliate me, to establish her dominance and begin the process of isolating me from my family and my community. Instead, she had revealed her true nature to people who wouldn't stand for it. And in doing so, she had brought together a group of strangers who became allies, and allies who became friends, and friends who became the kind of family that chooses to protect each other. The bill had been split all right, but not the way she had planned.